Okay, we're going to look at the plan of action and milestones. This template will be read-only, but you can download a copy and use it in your own practice. So a plan of action and milestone is a list of all of the deficiencies that you have in your security program, and it's where you're going to catalog it, what your plans are, why you're doing it, if it's a compliance failure or a security failure. So what we're going to go through is, each column. So your POAM number, really this is a risk number or a just some sort of unique tracking identifier, so you can keep track of it and refer to it in reports. But what we'll do is we'll start here with the controls affected. And so, for me, I'm following a NIST framework in our practice. And so I'm going to say, here we've got a control failure on the AC1 practice. And so, from that, I've got an open firewall port that we found during one of our scans. And then, so with that, we had, TCP 3389 open, which if anyone's familiar, that's remote desktop. And so this was open on the DMZ. And so this is a problem. And so we found this with Nessus, our vulnerability scanner. And, this port is, let's say, on, our web server 01. So this is the server that is affected by having this open remote desktop port. So who is my owner? So this will be like my system admin. So this is going to be, John Doe. Don't want to put any real information out here for you, but, we're going to document who owns this system. Who are we going to go to remediate this and handle this problem? And so the system owner will typically have that in our asset register, who's responsible for maintaining it, who's the owner. And so the next thing we want to go through is, what is our remediation plan? So, our remediation plan is we're going to, implement firewall rule to block RDP. Okay, and then we put what date did we find this? So we found this today, so we'll just record the date. And then, based on our change window at our company, so our scheduled completion date, we'll put that into change management. So, I'm going to put that on the 23rd. So that's when we're planning on this being completed. The plan milestones. So this is, how, what are the milestones to track this? So we've got change submitted, change approval, security review. Then we have, the rule implemented, and then we have our test for closure. Okay, so put some word wrap on here. So that way all the milestones of how we're going to fix this happens. Now, if there's a third-party vendor, so if we're working with another provider, so this vendor may be, if it's a managed firewall, we could put in that this is managed by our carrier. Or, if it's this is a specific thing, we could track that this is, let's say, a Cisco firewall. So there's some dependencies that we can keep track of. If we're outsourcing the work or if it's dependent on a product, we can put those here as the vendor. And so next we're going to take our risk rating. So the original risk rating, let's say for this asset, based on how we calculated the risk, was a medium. But now, because of this open firewall port, this is now a high risk. And so what we're looking at is how this deficiency is affecting our risk. And so then, we look at this risk adjustment and do we need to adjust our risk in our risk register? And so we could say, yes, we need to adjust our risk. So we could say no, this is a short window. We're not going to adjust our risk rating for the firewall based on this new information. But you do have that choice here. And so ultimately, this is the decision of, are we going to increase the risk of this system based on this finding? So this might be, talking in the POAM in general, this is a very specific risk to the firewall port being open. But let's say here on the POAM, we're going to have a vulnerability, and that vulnerability is a software that we can't update. So, that one we might say risk adjusted is yes. Next, for false positive, we want to look at, was the remote desktop port actually open? And so, since Nessus found it, we might say, no, this was not a false positive. But if during our closure, we decide, hey, yes, it is a false positive, we would come in and change this to yes. So is there operational requirements that are involved with this? No, not to close this port. And then if there's any deviation. So here we're going to document, do we have a specific configuration baseline that we've established for our company and a standard that we have to meet, but we need to deviate from that. So maybe this remote desktop port is required. So, in our investigation of this deficiency, we find out that yes, remote desktop is required for a third party. So we could adjust our, our remediation. So instead of to block all RDP, we might say block RDP from, web, but allow only for, let's say our third party vendor. So, we can adjust these as needed to keep track. So then this deviation. So this will say like standard is no RDP from web to DMZ, but necessary vendor support contract. So if we are deviating from our company standard, we want to keep track of those deviations and why it's needed. And then if there's any comments that you need to do to track this. So your plan of action, a milestone, is kind of a living document to keep track of every risk and deficiencies. And so once you're finished with it, you can actually remove it, right? Or you could add a column that says actual completion date or archived. So you can adapt it to your business, your practice. But the idea is to track every deficiency. And this is vulnerabilities, this is detections, this is compliance failures, policy violations. So you're going to keep track of any of this and then track it all the way through to completion, so that if you have an audit or an assessment and they're asking, how are you tracking deficiencies? How are you, verifying their close? This becomes that evidence for an assessment that says, here's how we're tracking it. And so it can be manual like this. You can have your tools, have your alerts, and then you can supplement this report with that. But, we use these to kind of funnel any information from our different systems into one master list to show us the health of our security program.